You're listening to the Inspire Excellence podcast, recorded at the BVA headquarters, with your hosts, Kevin Miller and Tommy Alquist. Each episode is focused on shedding new light on different perspectives to create dialogue that inspires excellence.
Great to have everybody here once again for the Inspire Excellence podcast. Tommy Alquist, Kevin Miller, and today a very special guest when we're talking about service and community.
You know, when we made our list, Kevin, when we started this, at the top of the list was Sheriff Gary Raney. I served with you on the United Way board. And I got to tell you, when you think of pillars of the community, for over a long period of time of public service, giving back, you're at everything. You do so much for us. And I just appreciate it. I can't wait to talk to you today. The whole reason behind the podcast is to get people on, tell their stories, and inspire, members of our community to do great things. And in my life, I don't know of anyone that's done that more in this community than you. So thank you, Gary, for being here today. We really appreciate it and look forward to this.
I'm humbled. I'm humbled by your words and humbled to be asked.
It's true.
Well, Gary, first of all, for people that remember you, and we were talking right before the podcast started, as the sheriff, what are you doing right now?
So I retired now about 3.5 years ago. Miss all the people and the wonderful things going on at the sheriff's office, but there's a time for everything. So when I retired, most of my work was around the Department of Justice, who, when agencies would ask for help in figuring out what to do better, then I was one of the people that would go help them. Most of those programs aren't funded anymore, so I do a lot of private work. Far away is Massachusetts, but most of it's in California, where I go help law enforcement agencies improve their policy and practice, reduce litigation, try to help justice work a little bit better.
There are so many subjects we could talk. I know you're an expert on so many different things. Seriously, I mean, you consult around the country on so many different topics that we want to talk about today that matter to people listening to this. But before we go there, I've always believed that people follow people. And I think that whether that's in business or in the sheriff's department or in life, people follow people. People follow you. People look up to you. You've got, tell us a little bit about your upbringing and what allowed you to build the character and those leadership qualities that allowed you to have such a successful career and get to this point in your life. I'd love to hear the backstory that I've never heard, Gary.
Tommy, I think you're absolutely right about that. People follow people. So I grew up on a small farm, native Idahoan. And I think, a fundamental work ethic was when you get up and drive a tractor, when you set siphon tubes at dawn and you set them again at dusk.
Where did you grow up?
Over outside of Caldwell.
Okay.
Yep. And so, I think that kind of set my work ethic. I came over to Boise to start my undergraduate degree at BSU. And I'm sorry, let me back up a little bit. So while I was over in Caldwell in high school, because of mostly working on the farm, then I couldn't get involved in a lot of things. But along came this ride-along program with the police department. I had no idea about being a law enforcement officer. Just that sounds fun, right? You're going to watch people get busted and lights and siren, and they make TV shows out of that. So
be careful, because if I'm learning that this guy, that's secretly what he wants to do. he missed his calling in life. He just wants to be undercover.
I didn't know it was then. So I started riding around with the police department, and I was 14 years old then. And by the time I was 16, I knew this is what I wanted to do. And that's been just a few years ago. And I'm so thankful for my career. And, I never look back. I don't know what else I'd do. But to your point, Tommy, is, along that way, I had some great mentors and some great role models that taught me about public service and about being professional and acting professional and being ethical, being ethical in your profession as well as your personal life. And along that way, one of the things I think I've always believed is you can learn from anybody. And you particularly want to learn from good people. And so throughout my career, I watched from subtle things about, just the way that person talked to that citizen, that deputy, or maybe my sergeant or somebody along that way. That was just really great the way they did it. Or taking the extra time with somebody, a victim of a crime, to really understand where they're coming from and how they feel and how we can help. So many people sort of molded my career. And then as I went along in my career and moved more into administration, and I got to make change. I started getting to be involved in some change process in the sheriff's office. And I loved that because You know, in any organization, you come up and when you're at the bottom, you wonder, why aren't they doing this? Why aren't they doing this? They should be doing this better. And to be involved in that, and then just the higher I went, the broader my circle of influence got. But you know, any sort of effective change takes collaboration. And so whether it's collaboration in the sheriff's office, collaboration across government, or collaboration in the community, when my job was about public safety and improving the community, that is a wide net. So when we come back to United Way or other nonprofits I was involved in, I was the chair of Big Brothers Big Sisters, you know, all that goes to make our community better.
I'm going to ask you a couple more questions because I'm interested to know, what about you having a presence, an ability to lead, whether it's in a boardroom or in a community setting? Tell me a little bit about your father. There's got to be there's something there that did you always have that naturally? Did you develop it over time? But I've never, and I don't say this lightly, like Gary, when you're in a room with you just have a presence that I've always respected. And I wonder was it just something you've had, or did you have to develop that for people out there that are listening?
I think I had to develop it. My father was a great guy. He really was. Everybody liked him. He was pretty unassuming, was not sort of outgoing and public, just a great guy that everybody liked. And I really didn't have those immediate influences, but along my career, I started training at the police academy. And the first thing I ever trained was report writing. So for 8 hours, I had to train report writing. So how do you take 8 hours of the most boring subject in the world and make it interesting? Now, and then a few years later, Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, does an outsourced police management program, and they asked me to teach for them. And one of the things they asked me to teach was public budgeting. And I said, but I don't really know anything about public budgeting. And they said, well, everybody that does can't teach. So I actually learned a lot by that process. I had to self-teach a lot about public budgeting. So I would go in for 5 straight days and talk to 30 to 50 law enforcement leaders from across the country in these various sessions a couple times a year, and teach them public budgeting. And so it built on from there. And then in the public persona, you know, getting a message across and again, listening to others and how they did it. You know, Governor Dirk Kempthorne was a master of telling a story. So he would always sort of make a point, of course, later secretary, but he would make a point and then he would back it up with a story. And I picked up on that and said, you know, that's what people helps them relate.
I'm so glad you said that it wasn't just like DNA. And because I think for people listening, we have a lot of business leaders that listen to this podcast. And for those that are listening, you can watch and listen and learn and pick mentors and then improve yourself, right? Make the changes that make you into a leader. And it's good to hear that, because I think a lot of people are looking for mentorship now. And so whether you're running a small business or you're running a large organization, always improving the way you lead, the way you listen, the way you go about your business, it is possible. So I'm glad that was the story.
Oh, I absolutely think so. You know, it's a lot of times, especially if we know a lot about what we're talking about, we get into the weeds too much. Yeah. And that's why I tell a lot of people, you know, think of the 2 or 3 things that you want somebody to walk away from the conversation with and focus on those. And the more things you add beyond that, the more they forget.
Great. Well, I have a tough time calling you Gary. I just do. I just want to say Sheriff Raney.
You know what? I was in law enforcement for 32 years. I've been called a lot of things. So,
okay. Well, Gary, when we take a look at how the Treasure Valley has changed, your perspective as a native, your perspective who it is your DNA, an Idahoan, and the elements coming in as someone who was in charge of protecting us.
Yeah, obviously there's been a lot of change, and I think there's going to be a lot more change. And as I said, I do most of my work in California, most of it for really large law enforcement agencies in urban areas. And so first and foremost, I'm so thankful to always come back to Idaho, because this is such a great state. We don't have those problems that I go down there and work with them on. But we've got to think about how do we avoid those problems. So, you know, simple things like transportation and infrastructure that are so important to us getting here. You know, driving across town now isn't what it used to be. It takes quite a bit longer. From a criminal justice standpoint or crime standpoint, you know, things are changing with the growth in the community. It's not, quote, the Californians or anybody else that's coming in. Population growth is going to bring a proportional amount of criminal activity with it. And we're lucky there too, even though we think we have problems here. We are lucky, but we need to stay out ahead of that. how do we keep our kids engaged so that they see a future that is not in a gang down the road? Idaho doesn't invest in early childhood education as a government, and we need to change that because it's one of the most important triggering events to success in life. We need to give kids opportunities like Boys and Girls Club to be able to go have positive influences and those mentors that may not be at home. People in the criminal justice system, there's so much information that we have now that we didn't have when I started about the effects of a low-level offender, a first-time arrestee that goes into the criminal justice system, and what happens when they stay in jail a few days versus what happens when they get out of jail, and as sort of their punishment for their low-level crime, they instead have to take some classes and maybe give back to the community. Things like that we need to be on top of, and we need to be forward-thinking and make sure we retain this quality of life, because so often government waits until it's too late and then reacts. And if we just wait for that, then we'll be like every other place that's got urban crime issues.
When I think of, there are some topics I'm going to bring up to you right now that we could probably spend hours on. I mean, I would love to hear your thoughts on, but there's several in the legislature right now that involve criminal justice and Idaho and trends around us that I would love to hear your take on. So I'm going to throw a couple of them out there and we'll take them in any order. But the whole marijuana legalization, specifically hemp, and the legalization that's going on around us. Just recently now we're to the border here in Ontario where it's just right over the border. What pressures that's going to put on us, and what your take on that. I would love to hear your thoughts on that. And then probably the next one, just because I don't want to throw too many out at the same time, is just the prisons. What's going on? Cost, recidivism, your thoughts, because I know you're a thought leader on that as well. I'd love to hear your take on those two, and we'll see how much time we have. But
sure. I'll try to keep it short. So marijuana, eventually it's going to be legalized nationally. I mean, the federal government let that slide too far now to turn around, and because everything is about money and states get tax revenue from that, I just don't see it turning around. Every year, more and more states legalize either medicinal marijuana or recreational marijuana. So we'll continue to have those pressures. We'll be surrounded by states that haven't allowed it, and eventually I think every state probably will. And is that good or bad? I don't want to see it. I relate it somewhat back to prohibition. When you outlawed alcohol, then there was lots of illegal bootlegging going on. We've had illegal marijuana. We don't know what the effects of legalization are really going to be. Some states have handled it well. Some states have not handled it well. I know anecdotally, when we go to Portland and walk around downtown, it is a disgusting place. And whether that's directly attributable to the legalization of marijuana, I don't know. All I know is it's different than it used to be. So we're going to struggle with this. I think, like with the hemp bill, you've got factors there, both on the agriculture, both on the cannabis, law enforcement not being able to test THC, a number of issues. But I think at the end of the day, we're going to see legalized marijuana. What that effect is going to be, I don't know. Probably by the time it gets there, we'll be really in a relief valve from dealing with the dispensaries opening up in Ontario that all people are doing is driving over there, getting as much as they want and bringing it back in here. And Idaho State Police stops them, in Payette County and arrests them. But it's really confusing. To me, when the federal government under DEA didn't take an action for an injunction against marijuana, the legalization of marijuana, and set that, whatever that answer is going to be, the federal government let each state have its own state rights. We sort of like that in sound, but when you're talking about something like marijuana legalization, it's problematic. So that's a tough one. And then, prison overcrowding.
Before you get off marijuana, though, this is listening to Kevin's show every morning. This is one of his favorite topics. Do you have anything more to ask or add to that? Because he's the
one thing I've always admired about Gary Raney, Sheriff Raney, is he's a realist, and he goes back to the feds. As he said.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, but I know you're the marijuana guy.
Just say no.
Careful how you say that.
You're the anti-marijuana guy.
Thank you for the clarification. Yes.
Mrs. Miller, I want to make sure that was a clarification.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All right.
Yeah, prison overcrowding. The problem is we keep putting our fingers in the dam. and trying to react to it. It's too late. We have this overcrowding problem. Now, how do we undo that problem? What we need to do is change our thought process and change it from the start, because there's things that we could do. For example, the mandatory minimum law change. I'll tell you how I feel is I am now. One day I was in support of mandatory minimums. Now, after knowing a lot more, reading the research, knowing the outcomes, we should let judges individualize the punishment that somebody gets, because everybody is different. Not everybody that commits a crime categorically is the same level of bad guy based on that charge. So right now, mandatory minimums put people into custody. And law enforcement and prosecutors came out in strong support of retaining mandatory minimums, had anecdotal stories to it, but the research is out there that it doesn't make good sense. What we need to do is fix the system and say, who do we really want in prison? We have a capacity in prison. And if Idaho wants to build more prisons and have a greater capacity to hold a higher level of offender, then that's great. But the problem is now we're just sort of pushing people in there based on a number of different criteria in a number of different geographic locations across the state for a number of different crimes without a lot of science and research. And so what I would like to see, and hopefully it will probably be years to change, is that we apply science that, again, we have now for who should go to jail in the first place. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be held accountable in the criminal justice system, but who should go to jail? Because if you go to jail, you are more likely to go to prison. Not the same charge. If you go to jail, you are more likely to go to prison. You're more likely to reoffend. You come back to jail. If you reoffend and come back to jail, you're more likely to go to prison. We need to look at the system. And part of the problem is that prisons are paid by the state. Jails are paid by counties. So part of why my work is so prevalent in California, state overcrowding system there. They were getting sued. They were going to lose billions and billions of dollars. The state of California came up with a scheme whereby they gave counties one-time money and also gave them 38,000 state prison inmates back down into county jails. Cost shift, right? So there was an incentive and there was a cost shift back down to county jails. So it has changed the system there. Jails that were built for people to be in custody for 2 years. I work in Santa Clara County. They've got 2 30-year jail sentences. So people are going to live in jail. Actually, about 15 years is how long they'll be there in a place that was built for 2 years. Will there be problems in those jails? Absolutely. So back to my whole point is, let's think broader about the system. How can we regionalize? How can we apply science, which is out there and which is being used by other states for years to determine who should go to jail? How should we process criminal justice? Could we have diversions for people that just made one-time mistakes into better pro-social programs, education programs, family support programs that don't tie up the criminal justice system? Jails and prisons should be for the bad guys who are going to risk our safety and the safety of our families.
I've got a good one from, I've got the Tommy Alquist question, but I'm going to save that for a moment. Speaking of jails, you ran Ada County, Canyon County. We talked about that for many, many years. What is our local situation when we're looking at our jails, sir?
Again, we are, Canyon County, has been overcrowded for a long time. They've got another jail bond coming in May. It doesn't look good for that jail bond, and I don't know what they're going to do. They've got to put together that compelling argument because they can't build it with existing dollars. They have to have a bond because so much that needs to be done. Do you patchwork together more of the existing facility? There's an argument to build on the old site or to go out and build a new facility that's very expensive. Ada County is becoming overcrowded. I opened 2 different facilities within the Ada County Jail while I was sheriff. The one I'm most proud of was the health services unit that dealt with mental illness in jails. And we could talk about that for about the next 3 days because that's changed. You've got more violent, more long-term criminals coming into Idaho, and those that are really prison bound. And at the same time, you have mental illness, and you can't talk about jails without talking about mental illness anywhere in the United States. So both of those pressures coming into jails. Our capacities, there's a few places that just open new jails that have beds that they're renting to other places. But we've got about 35 jails in Idaho. We need to regionalize. We need to share. We're okay in this metropolitan area here, but if you go out to rural Idaho and they're running 5, 10, 15, 20 bed jails, it's very inefficient. It's hard to do. It's hard to maintain staffing and training and all of that. We need to be sharing. We need to be sharing and collaborating across the criminal justice system for wise answers. So, and until we start doing that, we'll just keep building jails and we'll keep building prisons.
Okay, I've got to ask the Tommy Alquist question. You have been rumored for years to run for office. Tommy can tell you.
So's Tommy.
Tommy can tell you it was
Been there, done that.
Tommy loves the experience, but I mean, just listening to you, people thought that you would run for Congress, governor, that sort of thing. Is that in your future?
I am a happy person. So, I always give that caveat of never say never, but, going through the political process, I think just like Tommy, it wasn't what I enjoyed. I didn't enjoy the political part of it. I enjoyed the community interaction, but the politics, and especially the divisive politics, I still sit on boards in Washington, D.C. and see how dysfunctional the federal government is back there. I see a lot of it's seriously not in the individual's fault, but the dysfunction of our state legislature, just by the fact that, they come and they try to get everything done in 3 months. And, it's sort of one of the things I always said about county commissioners working at the county level. You get 3 commissioners who have no experience at all in county government. It's not their fault. It's the way we do it in Idaho. No experience in county government, no real training, who come in and now they're suddenly supposed to run, I think it's currently about a $280 million company. It's the company of running Ada County, and it's
and do it without data. I mean, you brought it up. I mean, one of the most you, for better or for worse, got a nice view of the underbelly of government for a couple of years, right?
Yeah.
And probably the most shocking takeaway for me after the politics part of it, which is just for guys like us, it's just not what we like, right? But the lack of data. We don't do anything in the business world, nothing, without data, because it's your own money, right? So you're thinking, well, what's most effective? Well, we think we know what feels good, but let's look. And I did just listen to your explanation of the prison system and the jails. What's the data show, right?
Absolutely.
I look at local government and county government and state government, and the legislature. Why on earth don't we fund data? At least get the right data in front of them. Makes it harder to make bad decisions. Makes harder for special interest groups to skew things one way or the other. If you're actually looking at data, because most of the time data exists, truth exists. Here are the results. Now, then you can choose to let politics get in the way. But a lot of times in Idaho, we don't even know what the data is while we're making big decisions that politics are still in the way of. But isn't it a great starting point for counties or cities or the legislature to say, what does the data show us? But that doesn't happen. Boy, that's frustrating to me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things I see all over. And it doesn't matter size and it doesn't matter Idaho. So one of my clients is the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office in Silicon Valley. And so one of my projects down there, I was hired to try to analyze their data and tell them what their problems were, sort of what they could do better and what they could do worse. Here's Silicon Valley, and actually they have very, very poor data systems. But I also work for San Bernardino County Sheriff. It's got a budget of over $2 billion in just the sheriff's office, and same sort of thing. Good people, and it's really the epitome of government. It's good people doing good things day by day, rather than really looking out in the future. I think one of the things that has made me successful about this consulting career is when I was sheriff, and to back up a little, when I got my master's degree, I actually finished my master's degree first year I was sheriff. When I got my master's degree, I focused on how can we take business practices and principles and apply those to government. So a lot of that was around strategic planning and measuring outcomes and data. And so, put that in place in the sheriff's office, and it brought us a lot of success. And I started presenting it at conferences. And I think it's part of what makes me who I am today as a consultant is that I come in with that approach of what's your data show? And no matter where I go, they never know. Mm-hmm. So I help them get there. I help them try to figure out, what are those causal factors? I mean, it's sort of hard in government because we don't have clear outcomes. What we want to do, a business does, that bottom line profit. If you think about what is the outcome of government, it's a little bit harder. But yesterday I'm sitting in Santa Clara County with all of these command staff at the sheriff's office, and we're talking about the use of force in mentally ill inmates. And I started saying, well, how often are we using force, we being them, using repeated force on mentally ill inmates, and how often are the same deputies using force across the board? And if we look at that data, we can start to maybe get to some of the causal factors. Because if we're having to use force and we're talking about medication, force medication, because they're psychotic, very psychotic. If we're having to do that day after day after day, mental health management is the source of the problem. And deputies are only the ones who have to deal with not managing the mental illness well. I don't know if that's the case or not, but you're absolutely right, Tommy. There is research out there. There is data out there. We know so much more. I could talk on a number of fronts about things that we could be doing, but start small. We're not going to put big data factories into government, but there's some simple decisions every year that we could make a big difference if we just looked at what was out there and what other people are doing well.
As you're talking, I'm thinking that it's pretty unique, your perspective on the Treasure Valley right now, because you're from here. You were the sheriff here. So you see the needs, right? You see down at the safety net needs of a community, and you've sat here and watched us change. And now in this phase of your life, you're spending time in the People's Republic of California, right? And you're seeing what's going on around us. From your perspective, what should we be watching out for as citizens of the Valley? What should we be saying to ourselves? Hey, let's keep an eye on this, because we don't want us to become some of these things that have changed other communities for a negative, in the negative direction. What's on your radar? Because your perspective is different than ours.
There's a few things right now. Certainly opioids, and that's a conversation in itself as to how we got where we are, but it's a big impact. We can look back, and Kevin and I used to talk about methamphetamine around 12 years ago when we had the meth crisis. We need to be out ahead of that on a short-term level, the opioids, but substance abuse doesn't change a lot. The rate of illicit substance abuse doesn't change a lot anywhere, and it doesn't change a lot in Idaho. It's just the substance that is abused change a lot. And Tommy, from your ER days, you know a lot of that. So drugs is such a driver of crime and quality of life. I think, again, going back to catching somebody and locking them up, if you're trafficking, if you're really responsible for the source, that's one thing. But if you're that low-level user that has a family and a job and you got hooked on an opioid because you had a back surgery and then you couldn't take the withdrawal off your narcotic medicine, we need to do something else about those sorts of people and to help them out. I think the quality of life here, again, coming back to even just transportation and infrastructure and how the culture of our community, and that's still what's one of the really unique things about Idaho. That old saying that we've all heard so many times, you wave with all fingers. That those things are important here, and finding ways. And I don't know whether, Boise's got an initiative about something about being nice, and Meridian's got something about being nice, and those are good, but how do we change the culture of the greater community? Because the culture doesn't stop at city limits or county lines. It's regional at least. And so, again, I think it's collaboration. I think from my standpoint, it's government collaboration. We're starting to become a little bit more divisive. Boise has become significantly Democrat. Out in Meridian and Nampa and the rest of the area is still very conservative. And so how do we bring those together to do what's right?
Yeah. It's a great point. Public transportation is not partisan.
Right, exactly.
The traffic on these roads or sewers or how we fund or one of the statistics that still just drives me crazy from Nora is there's still 3,500 homeless kids in the Nampa school district.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So while we're sitting here and life is good for us and our families and most of the people we know, there's still a lot of people struggling.
There is. And I think particularly, again, you can't solve it all at once, but there's so many opportunities to make a little bit of a difference with a lot of people. It's the people on the fringe you want to start with. The involuntarily homeless. We have voluntarily homeless that they don't want a residence to live. They like the way they live. They don't want the restrictions. But there are families out there. Those are the ones we need to be focused on. There are people who are at that low level of the criminal justice system that are maybe committing a crime, but committing it for, I don't know what the right word is. It the right reason or the wrong reason? But I mean, committing it because of their circumstance, not because they really have criminal intent. That in the criminal justice system, we should be more focused on. There's a lot of opportunities, and there are efforts going on, but there's also resistance to those efforts because people change slowly and they change their thought process slowly, and they have turf that they want to protect sometimes.
What would be your advice to people that want to go into law enforcement? The idea of restraint now more than ever, people grab their phones and try and provoke law enforcement. We don't recognize, it seems, the restraint that law enforcement has these days now more than ever. So for people listening, what would you say to them, sir?
You know, I say the same thing I've always said, and I think it's very true, is that if you have the right personality, it is a wonderful career. Every one of those things that happens now that puts law enforcement under scrutiny will ultimately only make us better. So when somebody holds up a phone and then videos us and catches us acting professionally and doing all of the right things, we should be really proud of that. And if we don't act professionally, we don't do all the right things, we should learn from that. So, you know, unfortunately, what we see is across the nation, and if you think about the number of law enforcement officers out there, you know, they're being caught. We have always been sort of the tip of the spear or right in the eye of the public, and that'll always be that way. So in many ways, people with their phones have really raised an awareness in law enforcement to be more careful, actually do some law enforcement training videos. And I titled one of them, "Don't Be on YouTube." And I just took these clips of cops doing really stupid things on YouTube and getting caught and overreacting. You know, law enforcement training in Idaho is a good example. You can still be out there driving a patrol car, writing tickets, pulling your gun, maybe taking somebody's life for 364 days before you ever graduate the academy. The academy is minimal. It's hard to be able to train somebody who is in one of the bigger urban agencies and also train somebody who may be in Pinehurst, Idaho, Northern Idaho. They have one police officer. So our training is behind, but all of this that's going on, you know, I hate to see it. It kind of hurts me in the heart, but in my head, I know, you know what, we're going to be better for this.
The term community policing, you've lived it.
Yeah. One of the sad things when we talk about things that police are doing now, and I say, you know, it's very predictable because if you remember the term, community policing was really started in the 80s and came through the 90s, and there was a lot of federal dollars that came through to hire school resource officers and community policing programs. Feds were funding community policing training. Get out of your car, get to know your community. And then what happened? 9/11. 9/11, after that, those dollars all changed to active shooter training, counterterrorism defense, how to react against that force. And so we've been programming our cops, I mean, generically on a broad scale, we've been programming our cops to be really focused on that. And I think we're coming back to it now. I like a lot of the things I'm seeing, especially locally, about our law enforcement agencies getting back and connecting with the community while still being vigilant and being able to handle that threat. You know, that worst thing is probably that school shooting that could go on. That's what everybody dreads so much. I think we're going to find balance. But another major event, you know, could change that. We go back to the 60s, civil rights unrest, law enforcement. You remember the videos of the cops with fire hoses and police dogs and all of that. You know, law enforcement's always been at the front line of civil unrest, and we have a lot of civil unrest right now. You know, the division of politics at the national and local level, dissatisfaction with our politicians, sort of across the board, frustration right now. And in some ways, I've always sort of believed that while law enforcement, it may not be directly connected to it, when people start to become dissatisfied with government, they start to have protests, and who's going to be there on the front lines? It's going to be the law enforcement, and that's who's going to be videoed or having to deal with it.
I'll ask you another community service question, because again, when I think of you, I know you were our sheriff, and I get that, and you did that, but I really think of you as a community servant, because that's where I saw you so often, was not just serving us as law enforcement, but also giving back in a real way, Gary. I mean, you were everywhere. I mean, you were literally everywhere all the time, doing things for that safety net population. For our listeners out there, from someone that's got a really unique perspective in this valley, and they're thinking to themselves, I want to do something, because you hear things all the time, but I want to go do something different this year or this month to make a difference in the lives of those who need it most. What would you tell them? What would you tell them? Where would the first place you'd say, hey, go do this or go try this in the valley, because there's some needs?
Early childhood development. So that's education and mentorship. People need to have role models, whether they're 3 years old or 30 years old. I still have role models today. So I think particularly that imprinting on that young mind, and whether we do that through the schools and early childhood education, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, Boys and Girls Club, all of the good youth programs, I think that's so important when I talk about people who have a social responsibility that starts really so young. And sadly, there's parents out there who, on one hand, maybe they're just working too hard to make a living for their family and can't be home. On another hand, maybe they're out partying or drinking every night, whatever that case may be. Whatever happens there, that kid deserves the opportunity to succeed and to have hope in life and to see a vision. And we know that as kids get older, they need to have a vision of success, not just day to day. What am I going to eat tonight? But I need to have a vision of success. So we need to invest in that. And then on a broader level, people need that financial stability. We know that when an inmate leaves the Ada County Jail or leaves the prison system, they need enough education to be able to have an income, to be able to sustain and not have to go steal or sell drugs or something. And they also need the stability of housing and social circles around them. So the same sort of thing. We want kids and we want families to live with social or financial stability. And so that's not the guy at 13th and Myrtle standing by the box getting $5 handouts. That's exactly what you shouldn't be doing. And the Reverend Bill Roscoe said that so well. You can help them out in a lot of ways. But what we need to do is really invest again in that level of our community that is out there and trying, and by circumstance, they're having a tough time. And that's where to help them, and by helping them comes full circle to helping their kids as well.
Fantastic.
Do you have I would imagine one of the biggest regrets that you've ever had in your distinguished career was not being able to be part of the lip sync challenge of police officers across the country? Wasn't that amazing?
It's great. It's like that example of, there was certainly a time in law enforcement when doing something like that would have been looked down upon, and that's just stupid. And there's still a lot of criticism out there. Wait a minute, they're taking time when they should be out patrolling the streets to do a lip sync challenge or to put up a funny Facebook video. I think it's going so far to reconnect our law enforcement back with the community and show that we're human and bring a smile. On Twitter, I don't know if you know Wyoming PD. So the Wyoming Police Department, not in Wyoming State, it's either Wisconsin or Minnesota. It's this little town of like 3,500 people. There's like 6 or 9 officers on this police department. They got like 35,000 followers because they use these little quips of humor. And go look them up. They're funny and humanizing. And the cool thing about it, you never see their face. It's not individual. They take pride in their department. They send public safety messages. It's sort of a phenomenal little story. But, I like that law enforcement's humanizing themselves again and getting out there and doing things that help kids relate to us. And one of the things I always liked was going around and being able to be in uniform. Whether there's a deputy, whether there's a sheriff, being able to be in uniform, sit down with kids. And, I couldn't go play basketball with them because they'd beat me because I wasn't ever very good at basketball. But that's what we need to be doing. We need to not just be reactive to crime calls, but we need to be reactive to our community and what they want. And the community needs to be connected with public safety, with law enforcement and other public safety entities as well.
I say this as often as I can because a little bit of a unique perspective, 18 years in an ER, 10 of them at night, where I was with law enforcement almost every night in the ER. And in my entire career here, I never saw one interaction that wasn't the most professional, caring. And there's a lot of difficult situations that our first responders, our officers get challenged with. And as they come in, and we're just really lucky. I mean, I just, I go around the country and you spend some time back east, or you go through some of these communities where it's not that same feeling, right? It's in Minneapolis, and I was in Rochester for some things, and it's just a different feeling. And I hope we appreciate that here, that there is that respect and involvement, and it goes both ways. Hopefully our officers and law enforcement understand how much we appreciate the sacrifices they make and their families make to take a career path that's not easy, where you go out every day wondering, hey, I'm going out to protect the public and serve my community. So I hope that's felt, and you're still around a lot of law enforcement, but that appreciation.
Yeah, it's you're absolutely right. It's earlier in my career, people asked me, well, you're from Boise, Idaho. How do you become this national consultant? So, because having a career in Boise, Idaho, running the largest law enforcement agency of the state, I couldn't just learn from ourselves, right? I had to go out all over the United States to learn how to do things better. What are the new ideas? Going to conferences, studying agencies. What are you doing well? And when I'd hear about a program, adopting it. And that took me across most of the United States. And you're absolutely right, Tommy. Every time I'd come back and say, there really isn't any more professional law enforcement than the Northwest, and I'd include that as well. I think Idaho and Oregon have good law enforcement, Montana, all that. I mentioned working in Massachusetts. That was an eye opener for me. And I don't blame the union, but I saw it, the behavior come from the union that was just so selfish and sort of disrespectful and didn't really care about community service. They got into this job and it makes me scratch my head, but then it was all about themselves and all about what's their entitlements. And I see that, Chicago and other places that I go, we're very fortunate here. I can tell you around Idaho and particularly the Treasure Valley, our law enforcement's really professional and really ethical, and don't take that word for granted either. Not that other agencies are unethical, but the problems that we see with scandals, there's still always human beings. Human beings will always make stupid decisions on occasion, but we have really good cops here who are out doing a really hard job. Officer-involved shootings have gone up so much. When I started as a deputy, all I ever heard was stories of one that happened in the past. And the first one that happened, I was on patrol by about 3 years. And, now, unfortunately, there are a few a year. And, eventually, like Mark Stahl, a Boise officer who was killed in downtown Boise, we've been so lucky here because I think we do have good training and good awareness and that. And there's going to be another law enforcement officer that's killed, and that shakes a lot of people.
Gary, finally, what inspires you?
I love being part of change on a professional level. Again, I miss being involved in local issues. When I don't have the title of sheriff in front of my name, I don't get invited to anything anymore. I'd still like to go to that stuff, but it does change. It's just one of the things that I knew. I love being part of change. I love being part of making things better. So whether it was sheriff, whether it's being involved in local community, social issues, childhood development, all of that was great. And now as a consultant, I get to go outside and help other people change. And one of the things I always say is I really only want to work with law enforcement agencies that truly want to change and get better. I don't want to waste my time. I'll take their money and waste my time. No, thanks. But it really is satisfying to go out and see the change that can happen when people understand there's a little bit better way to do things. And to see when I can put up some data and some research about what they're doing and how to do it better. And I always called it the light bulb coming on. And that old saying, I love what I do. My wife, Angela, who is just it's everything about my personal life, gets to go with me, and we do some of this together because she retired from the Boise Police Department. So she gets it, and we get to work together. And that's really what is so fun and rewarding now is taking it to a bigger level and learning new things. It's like I learn all over again too, because I might have known how to do it here in Boise, Idaho, but I go somewhere like California or Nevada or Illinois, and the laws are different, the rules are different, the terminology is different. So I get to learn again too.
Well, so two things in closing. Number one, thank you.
Thank you
for a career of service here to our local community. Now you continue to do great things nationally, but thank you for that. And then secondly, we all need mentors in our life, people we look up to. And I know Kevin and I look up to you and appreciate you for what you've done and coming on today. And I know that a lot of listeners out there will appreciate what you had to say today. So thank you.
Well, I'm humbled. Thank you for having me.
And for everyone, strive for excellence.
You've been listening to the Inspire Excellence podcast. We invite you to find something that inspires you this week. Join us again for our next episode.